Welcome, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Karis Circle, and Karis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Karis Books. Karis Books is, of course, the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We are located in Decatur, Georgia, right across the street from Agnes Scott College. And unfortunately, we're not gathered together in physical community tonight, but we're really grateful to be gathered together in virtual community. We're here tonight celebrating Kenrya Rankin's new book. Kenrya is an award-winning author, journalist, editor, speaker, and on-air talent who creates dynamic, high-impact content that amplifies the lived experiences, advocacy, and work of people of color and shifts the narrative around who deserves liberation, justice, joy, and dignity in America. She is the co-author of How We Fight White Supremacy, a field guide to Black resistance. You can find her at kenrya.com, and she is at Kenrya on all social media. She's joined tonight by one of our favorite local folks, Mattice Haynes. Mattice is an Atlanta-based anti-racism practitioner, a trusted leadership coach to Black women and women of color, and a master facilitator and consultant with 20 years of experience. She is known for the care, integrity, and rigor she brings with partnering with those who desire to transform themselves in the service of our collective liberation. You can find her at mattissehays.com and at Mattice Haynes on all social media. And this event is co-sponsored tonight by our friends at the Auburn Avenue Research Library. Auburn Avenue librarians are going to be blessing us in the chat with lots of resources, which is amazing. This is one of my favorite new features about our partnership. So they're going to be putting things that the library is closed for physical browsing, but you can go online and check out all the resources. So as we're talking, they're going to be dropping articles, links for you to deepen your study if things come up that you want to learn more about. You can just open those tabs. Don't navigate away because we want to stay with the conversation, but open those tabs so that you can come back to them. At the end of the night, you also can just look through the chat and, bookmark anything you want to go back to. The chat's not going to disappear. The last thing I want to tell you is that you can ask a question at any point in the evening. Just click that ask a question button at the bottom. If somebody's already asked a question that's similar to the question you want to ask, you can just upvote their question. You also can, of course, buy Anti-Racism, Powerful Voices, Inspiring Ideas, as well as Kenrya's earlier book at any point in this conversation. So just click that teal button. It will take you to that page. It will not be disruptive. We want you to make sure that you have these books. So yeah, I'm going to get out of the way and welcome our wonderful speakers tonight. Thank y'all so much for being here.
Thank you, ER. Thank you.
Thanks, ER. That was dope.
Yeah. Well, welcome, Kenrya. So good to see you.
You too. It's been a while.
Right? I'm really grateful to be here tonight. Thank you for making the time to have this conversation with me. And a big shout out to Karis and the Auburn Avenue Library for supporting this. We couldn't be in better hands tonight. So I appreciate them for the hosting and the sponsorship. So today is Tuesday. I noticed October 20th, 2020. So 10/20/2020. We have made it to that day in this year. And before we jump deeper into the conversation, why don't you just have a little fun with you if you're open to that?
Okay, let's do it.
Okay. So I'm really into astrology. It's one of my little hobbies. So I would love to know, what is your zodiac sign?
I am an Aries.
Ooh, okay. I like the fire.
What's your sign?
I'm a Cancer, so it's water.
I don't know that much about Cancer.
Yeah, but I have a lot of Leo in my chart, so it's a lot of fire in there as well.
I know a lot about Leos, yeah.
So what is bringing you joy? How are you, moving through this year?
That is a very good question. Right before we got on, so, you and I were talking not too long ago, and I was telling you I have generalized anxiety disorder. So every time I have to do these, as much as I love getting to be in community with folks, it makes my heart go like this. And so I try to find ways to kind of bring things down and also to kind of boost myself up before we start. So today, what brought me joy is I'm rewatching New Girl on Netflix. I love that show. It is so foolish. It makes me so happy. And then I have a fuck anxiety playlist and I have a fuck it up playlist. Okay. And I move from one to the other to get myself hyped. It's heavily Beyonce. And then the
Okay.
last song I play right before I start is always Brown Skin Girl, because I'm a brown skin girl. And it makes me feel good. So that's what's bringing me joy today.
I love that. So you said a fuck it up playlist and a fuck anxiety playlist. Those are your two go-to.
Yes.
I love it.
Yep, those are big tools for me. Music just, I think music is powerful for most folks, and it definitely has a ability to help shift my mood in really real ways. So
who else is on the playlist besides Beyonce?
Oh, which one?
Well, what are some of your favorites? What really helps you, just like you feel the anxiety start to slip away, or you feel like you really feeling yourself and you really ready for this conversation?
So on the anti-anxiety list, I have a couple of Steven Universe songs. I adore that show. It makes me really happy. There's one called Here Comes a Thought that is literally about dealing with anxiety and about those moments when you spiral and how to ground yourself. And that one is really healing for me. There's this old song by Music Soul Child called Moment in Life that just makes me grin from ear to ear every time I hear it. There's Benz by Solange. I'm always like, why you make the shortest song the best song on the whole album? I love that song. It just speaks to the Cleveland in my soul. Yeah. So those are on that list. And then the fuck it up list is mostly Beyonce. There's some Lizzo. I think there's some like Jay-Z / Linkin Park in there.
Okay.
From the Great album that makes me happy. Yeah.
Yes. I love it. So you know what you need, right? You know what you need to kind of ground yourself and center yourself, and bolster you up as you go out and do this incredible work that you're doing in the world right now, which I know is not new for you. You've been at it for a long time. But yeah, this has been in some ways a different kind of year, right? That we've been doing this work.
Yeah, for sure.
Sure. So you mentioned Cleveland. Shout out to Cleveland. So tell me a little bit about your roots and your people.
Yeah, so I am from Cleveland. My people on one side are from Birmingham. On the other side, they're from Greenwood, Mississippi, which is why I sound like this. And I have a massive, massive, massive family. I think people say that, but they don't really get it. My dad is the youngest of 15 kids.
Wow.
Yeah. And most of them were born in Mississippi. He was one of the few that was actually born in Ohio. And my mom's side is big, but not like that. So I just grew up, even though my nuclear family was small when I was young, my family is massive. And I spent weekends with them. Like, that was what we did. I didn't get to hang out with my friends. We didn't do stuff like that. Everybody went over to the house, and adults played cards on the porch, and we ran around in the streets with no shoes on and jump rope and played a game called Drive-By, which is interesting. And yeah, that's who I'm from.
Okay. So you must have like hundreds of cousins.
Yes, literally.
Right.
Yeah. We were in the Call and Post, which is a black paper back home. We had a family reunion, and they came out and took pictures. And I think the count at that point, and this was 15, maybe 20 years ago, the count at that point was that I had 142 first cousins or something like that.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, there's a lot of us.
Yeah.
Okay.
And y'all close? Y'all deep, tight?
Yeah, I would say so, but I would say less so now. And I think that has to do with the fact that, like, that generational thing that happens, right? Where you start to lose the older members of the family, and they really were the ones who kept us all together. They're the ones who threw the cookouts, every summer, and had the family reunions. And people in my generation, quite honestly, I feel like we're all so busy and pulled in a million different directions that we don't take the same care that they did to keep us together.
Yeah. Those traditions were and still are like so grounding, for Black folks, those connections with cousins and aunties and, their rituals, our cookouts and Sunday dinners and all of those rituals that we have that keep us strong, keep us bolstered up. So thank you for sharing a little bit about your folks. So where are you joining us from tonight?
I am in the DC area, the DMV, where I've been for more than 10 years this time around, which is crazy.
Yeah. All right. Love it. Love it. Love DC. Another chocolate city for me. I'm here in Atlanta. I've been here now. Oh goodness. I don't know, since the mid 90s. So
Right.
yeah, love my chocolate cities and have spent a lot of time in DC as well. And also, like, I would love to hear, you know, folks in the chat, if y'all want to shout out where y'all are joining us from, would love to see some of that as well. You know, we are in virtual community, which, you know, is very different for me. I'm used to being in person with folks, but we're making this work. And so, yeah, if you want to shout out where you're joining us from, would love to see some of that in the chat as we continue the conversation. So I know something else that we have, you know, at least briefly connected around is like we are both mamas to Black daughters. And so my daughter, actually her birthday's on Friday. She's going to be 20 years old.
Oh,
Can you even believe?
Happy early birthday.
Yeah, shout out. Happy birthday to Isis. So, you know, I know that this book that you wrote, and I hope that folks have picked this up. And if you haven't, I hope that you will pick it up. It's a beautiful little book. And you will be so grateful to have this in your library. And so I know that you, partly the inspiration and kind of the audience for this book is a younger audience, right? And so I'm curious, like, you know, what are the conversations you and your daughter are having this year? How are you all doing as we've been navigating this global pandemic and, you know, ongoing demands and uprisings to defend Black life? Like, what kind of conversations are you and your daughter having?
Yeah, really honest and age appropriate ones. You know, a lot of that looks like we do a lot of talking and walking, and also I'm really good, and so is she, about tapping in our teams, which include my therapist and her therapist. Because if this were ever a year when you need a little bit of help, this is the one. Yeah. With the thing around the pandemic, I think in the beginning, and even really kind of still now, the biggest thing for her as a now 9-year-old has been thinking about what she loses, right? Like, there's been no summer camps. She missed being able to be with her friends and hold hands and do gymnastics at recess and run around the playground. Like, she's a very social kid. So we had a lot of conversations about ways to be able to connect with folks virtually, like we're in community here. And that has been helpful for her. I think that kids are super resilient, and she's definitely adjusted to what this kind of new normal looks like. I know she's, you know, still every now and then like, so what's happening next year? And I'm just always like, I don't know. Depends on how folks act. Yeah. But so a lot of just being honest with her about what's happening in the world. And then, you know, when it comes to the unrest that's been triggered by, you know, continued deaths of Black folks, you know, it came back down to talking. And the first conversation we had about it this time around, because we obviously talk about this a lot, right? It's my work. I remember we were voting in a primary in our state, and we were walking. We walked over to the little box, and she put it in. I took the picture of her. She's always been a part of voting with me since she was born. And then we were walking back to the car, and it seemed like it was out of the blue. And she asked me, like, why racism is a thing. Yeah, and like, right, like, come with the basic questions. Because I'm like, yeah, we talked a lot about how it impacts us, but we never really talked about the why of it. So yeah, so then we had this conversation about power and money and colonization and phrenology as justification for terror. And like, I think that people often feel like they can't have these type of conversations with kids, but I think that they can understand so many concepts if we take the time to actually talk to them and trust them with the information and give them context and give them support in the aftermath of what you've just taught them. I think, you know, that's one of the things I really like about Anti-Racism, Powerful Voices, Inspiring Ideas, is that it trusts young people with really big concepts and then supports them and surrounds them with quotes and, you know, information about the people that it comes from, and uses that as a way into, you know, what we call the work, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. And that's been my experience too. You know, in being on this journey with Isis all these years, it's like just those honest conversations and, you know, trusting her with that information. And knowing that like she has to go through her own process too, even though I'm sharing it with her, like, she has to go through her own process of like orienting herself and making sense of it, you know, in her own way as well. So I'm curious, like, what does your daughter think about your work?
I think that I told this story the last time I was in Atlanta. We have moments, like one in particular where we were actually sitting at this table where I'm sitting that you can't see, in these clear chairs from IKEA. And she sat down and she slid down in her chair and she was like, I mean, if there wasn't white supremacy, we could be doing so many other things. And I feel like that's the essence of how she feels about it. She's just like, ugh, more racism, like more of this. We got to keep doing this. I think she wants me to do something else.
Right.
But she understands that this is my work, but she's also over it. Yeah. And I'm sure she's not the only person who's over it, especially now. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. I'm with her. You know, I've always felt like I want to work myself out of a job, and I'm not, we're not there yet, but I would love to have to figure out how to do something else, like figure out how to paint or make something different that I don't know how to do right now.
And I don't know, write about music and fluffy hair and glasses. I don't know what I got.
Exactly. Yeah. So anti-racism, powerful voices, inspiring ideas. You know, I appreciate you so much, because I feel like you, I don't know, it's like the last two books, I feel like they just came right when I needed them. I was just like, oh, thank you. Like, this is what I was waiting for. So, you know, as you know, this word anti-racism in particular, right, is like being thrown around like even more now. And I'm one of those folks, like I do this work with organizations and with leaders. But what does it mean to you? What does anti-racism mean to you as a Black woman? And why was it important for you to curate this book now?
So, I mean, to me, it simply means to actively fight racism each and every day. And I think that looks different based on who you are and the privilege that you hold. So for me, that looks like spending my money with Black businesses, working with my publisher, shout out to Spruce, to donate a portion of the price of every copy of this book that's sold to the Movement for Black Lives Matter Fund. Donating my own money to organizations that are led by Black trans folks, and teaching my daughter that joy and self-love are very necessary and valid forms of resistance. For other folks, that might look like hiring Black people, running for the school board so that you can make sure that your district's policies serve our kids, or campaigning for politicians who actually give a fuck about you. Yeah,
absolutely.
You know? And
absolutely.
You know, I think, you know, you asked about, you know, why was it important to curate this book? And I mean, I think, you know, you said it was right on time. I think it's always the right time to talk about white supremacy in the ways that it's got us fucked up. Like, this book was originally supposed to be released in December. But my publisher saw what was happening and was like, we should probably enter the conversation sooner rather than later. And I appreciate, you know, that we were able to, I hope, contribute something to, you know, the knowledge base right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that like the format of the book, at least from what I can see, like is a very unique offering, right? Like to us right now. And that it's focusing on inspiration, and that, you know, it's filled with quotes from, you know, all different types of folks, right? Who are, you know, doing anti-racism work in their own way, trying to end white supremacy in their own way. And so what was the inspiration for, taking that approach, like inspiration and like words of wisdom from folks, as opposed to, you know, a different style of book?
Yeah. So I cannot take credit for that. That credit actually goes to my publisher, Sharon. You know, this book came about in kind of an unusual way. Usually, like with How We Fight White Supremacy, had an idea, talked to my agent and wrote a proposal, and then she pitched it and we got a deal. With this one, Sharon read How We Fight White Supremacy and was like, I want to work with her. And she reached out. And she was starting this new imprint, and she knew she had an idea for a series called Words of Change. And the point of the series is to use the wit and wisdom of folks to, you know, provide a grounding around certain big concepts. And the very first one was anti-racism. And so, but I like it because I think that using quotes, it does two things. I think that there's two audiences that also overlap for this book. One, I think it acts as a 101 for anybody that's interested, and particularly white folks, into the area of anti-racism. But I think it also is a good resource and reference. Besides the fact, like, it's beautiful, it can sit on your coffee table, but then you can pick it up and use it. So, you know, I like the quotes as an entry point in that way, and we've already used it that way in my house. So my daughter was working on this, you know, they try to make it as interesting as possible with virtual stuff. They were doing a skit, and she was the teacher in the skit, and the Cesar Chavez was coming in to talk to her class.
Okay.
Yeah, and so she, you know, she finished, she came out, she asked me to clarify to make sure she was saying his name right. And then she was like, so can you tell me about him? And I was like, oh, yes, ma'am. Sure can. So we found the page with his quote and his photo. We read it together. We talked about it. And then we flipped to the back where there's a short bio that I wrote about him, which gave her some more context. And then when she went back to class the next day, she was spouting off facts and whatnot and bragging, because that's what 9-year-olds do.
Right.
But I felt really good that I was able to just hand her something and help have it be a reference for her in that work. And it just kind of came out of left field.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it functions really well in that space. Plus, it's giftable. So that's that.
Yeah. I mean, what a powerful story and experience, though, like, you know, for a young Black girl to have, right? Like, to not only be learning, you know, the wisdom and the history, right, of some of our like greatest past and present leaders, but also like your mama wrote the book. Like that takes the experience to a whole nother level, I imagine. So
I guess she liked to brag, so that works.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And so you mentioned your other book, and we're going to talk about that too. I definitely want to bring that in a bit. But for me, like, part of why this book appealed to me so much, other than the fact that it was from you, and I'm a big fan and follower of you. But in my work as an anti-racism consultant and facilitator, I'm often working with leaders of organizations, nonprofit organizations, movement organizations. And in my anti-racism work and in my approach, I specifically center Black women and Black feminisms. And so I'm always using quotes, particularly from Black women. So a book of quotes was like about anti-racism was like right up my alley. I was instantly drawn to it and really grateful that you created it. And there's so many good quotes in here, right? Like, it's hard to choose a favorite. And so I think I have several favorites, but one of them that I want to kind of highlight is from Bell Hooks, who is someone that I look to and study all the time. But the quote that you have from her in this book is about, it says, racism is fundamentally a feminist issue because it is so interconnected with sexist oppression. Mm-hmm. And I was curious to see, like, so how do you think about the connections between like Black feminisms and this work of anti-racism, as it's more commonly being called nowadays?
So the first chapter of the book I co-wrote before this one, How We Fight, the first chapter opens with a quote from the Combahee River Collective's Black Feminist Statement. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna share it actually.
Yes.
So that's how we fight. I'll use a portion of it. So it reads, "We might use our position at the bottom, however, to make a clear leap into revolutionary action. If Black women were free, it would mean that everyone else would have to be free, since our freedom would necessitate the destruction of all systems of oppression."
Mm-hmm. Ashe.
Yeah, and it really underpins my approach to activism. Though I would expand it to now really specify Black trans women. This was written in 73, I think. The reality is that any liberation that doesn't liberate our family, who's pushed to the bottom of the hierarchical ladder that props up white supremacy, is not liberation.
Right.
If we're not all free, then none of us are free. And that really is the underpinning of my work. I think it's the underpinning of both of these books. Women are overrepresented in both books for a reason. And I think it's key. Like, people like to talk about this identity politics. I don't really know what that is. What I know is the identities that I have and the oppressions that are heaped on my back because of it, and the fact that there are folks who have even more of those oppressions heaped on them than I do, and that if I'm not doing the work of securing their liberation, then who gives a fuck if I'm liberated?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, that identity politics, right, is a way to kind of minimize the lived experiences of Black folks, Black women, Black trans folks, and to erase, right, that we are having this very specific experience, right, based on the intersections of our identities inside of these systems of oppression and domination. And so again, it's part of the reason I'm drawn to your work, because my work is very similar, right, and like centering us like unapologetically, and having an intersectional analysis to everything that we do. So I appreciate you like continuing that like commitment, right? You went into a very different style of book, right? Continuing that commitment, those values.
I don't know how to do without, right?
Right. It's like, I don't know how not to be myself, right?
Yeah.
And so given that, right, like there are like all kind of folks in this book, different genders, different racial identities, different backgrounds, different, kind of what they do in the world, how their activism and anti-racism is reflected. And so I'm sure it's hard to choose, but I'm wondering if you have a favorite or a couple favorite quotes in the book. And just which ones and why.
Okay, I feel like that's like picking a kid.
I know.
Okay. I don't know if it's my favorite. I can't pick a favorite.
Yeah.
But there is one that really sticks out to me, and it ties back to what we were just talking about. It's from Laverne Cox.
Yes.
And it reads, "Each and every one of us has a capacity to be an oppressor. I want to encourage each and every one of us to interrogate how we might be an oppressor and how we might be able to become liberators for ourselves and for each other." Yeah, that it really resonates with me. Like, I know that it can be hard to see the ways that other folks are being ravaged when somebody's eating you alive. But it's imperative if we're going to get free. And I think I like this quote because it pushes us to examine the ways that we hold up this system, sometimes without even realizing that we are.
Yeah.
And to consider the ways that we can lift up folks who have more oppressors on them than we do. What I realize is that as a cisgender heterosexual woman, I have privilege that my trans sisters don't. And what I know is that it's my duty to be in service to them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And like, how do you like, I have the same kinds of like commitments and principles and it's like living that out, right, is really what it's about. It's one thing to talk about, it's another thing to like be in it, right, and walking it every day. And so I'm curious, like, what does that look like for you? Like, how do you balance the like, like I got a foot on my neck sometimes too, and yet I know like my, trans or queer brothers and sisters are like dealing with a whole nother level of oppression. How do you kind of navigate that space and that experience?
Well, I think there's a few things, and some of them are super, honestly, I think they're all simple. I think it's just cumulative. So, for example, right before we got on this call, I was trying to figure out how to add my pronouns to my name, and you helped me figure it out because we were like, doesn't look like it's happening. One of the things is that I don't put that onus on non-binary folks, on anybody to have to identify who they are. I try to lead by example and model that. When I write books, I make sure that I'm inclusive of all of our voices and not just the ones that sound just like mine and lift up the same experience that I have. When like I was saying earlier, I donate to Black trans-led organizations, and so I know I'm not the only person who white folks have been asking who they should donate money to. And so what I always tell them is to give money to Black trans-led organizations. Because again, the folks who have been designated the least of us deserve the most of our resources. So I just try to make sure that I am centering them in my work. I also have a podcast, which I think we're maybe going to talk about a little bit more later. And so it's a literary erotica podcast, and my co-host, my best friend Erica, and I have been really intentional from the very beginning to make sure that we're not just telling stories that center cis men and cis women, that we're lifting up a whole bunch of different experiences and recognizing that pleasure comes to us all and should come to us all, and it doesn't have to look just one way. So I try to do it everywhere as much as I can.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm hearing you that it's a practice, like you're in it, every day, and moment by moment, day by day, you're navigating, figure out like, how can I actually show up right in this commitment versus just like talking about it all
the time. Yeah.
Yes. Which we know that happens all too often. Okay. And so I do want to like bring in, we brought it up a couple times already, but if you don't know, folks, this book, How We Fight White Supremacy, Kenrya and Akiba Solomon brought this to us last year. That's actually where I met you, is last year here in Atlanta when y'all were on this book tour, back when we used to go outside and be in person.
So long ago.
And so again, this was a book at the time that like, so many of the stories and just practices like really resonated. And so I was so grateful to have kind of this like compilation, right? Like all together. It was such a gift last year. And so I want to kind of like, we've already been having these two books kind of in conversation tonight with each other, but I'm curious, like specifically, as you have a book now that's about like anti-racism, and you have a book that's called How We Fight White Supremacy. Are those two things synonymous for you? And if not, like, what are the differences or similarities?
Yeah. So I actually think one of them is a subset of the other. So in anti-racism, I define white supremacy as a political, social, and economic system that thrives on the subjugation of people who have not been let into whiteness. And in order to help people really understand what that looks like, I asked them to imagine a ladder. This ladder is massive. It's firmly rooted into the earth, and it stretches up toward the sky. And sitting on the very top rung of that ladder is a white, middle-aged, wealthy, cisgender, heterosexual, Christian, able-bodied man. And all the rest of us get slotted onto the rungs below him based on which oppressors are heaped on our shoulders and weighing us down. And those oppressors are things like racism, ableism, homophobia, classism, transphobia, xenophobia, all the isms and the obias that you can think of. And so racism is one of those things. I like to think of it as like the main sorting factor, right? That one happens first, and then the rest of them tend to fall in line. And that props up the system. So racism props up white supremacy. And so being anti-racist is one of the ways that you can dismantle the system of white supremacy.
Absolutely. You gave a good word there, free little teach for folks.
I try.
And so, talk to us since we're here. For folks who don't know, talk to us a little bit about, just the gem, the magic that is inside of How to Fight White Supremacy. What can folks find? What can folks find in this book?
So I love How We Fight White Supremacy.
I do too. I love it so much.
It came from this idea that Black people are not a monolith, that we contain multitudes. And I was driving in my car and I was thinking about that, how we're not all the same, and thinking about the fact that just as there are millions of Black people being Black people in a whole lot of different ways, that there's millions of ways for us to fight white supremacy, millions of ways for us to resist. And I was like, maybe there's a book there, and maybe Akiba and I should write it together. And so we did. And what ended up coming together is 10 chapters that we say quite pointedly in the introduction start in the middle of a Black ass conversation. And it's meant to really collect and highlight the many, many different ways that Black folks are fighting. And so the chapters are all named after both conventional and or contemporary wisdom. So like the chapter on kids is like, I'm not one of your little friends.
I love it.
Yeah, like we wanted people to pick it up and instantly see themselves in it, know that it is a home for them, for their Blackness. And so the chapters really kind of look at big categories of the ways that people can fight. And so some of the ones that really, I think still, I mean, it all sticks with me, obviously, but the ways that I think are maybe surprising, like there's a chapter on love and the ways that we love ourselves whole in the midst of a system that tells us that we are not lovable.
Yes.
There's a chapter on laughter that looks at the ways that we, laugh through the pain, quite honestly. There's satire there. There's an essay from a stand-up comedian. There's, so much that I hope and that I found on the tour really resonated with folks. And then by the time they get to the last chapter, which is about freedom dreams, it's called Someday We'll All Be Free. And that chapter charges readers with closing their eyes and sitting in their own private dark and thinking about what they want the world to look like. How do we remake this system? I think, white supremacy is a distraction. It's jealous. It wants all your time. It wants all your energy. Like
the most.
Yeah, it's the fucking worst.
Yes.
And so it causes us to have to be reactive all the time, right? We're always having to react to the terrible shit that's happening. We got to react to police bursting into a 26-year-old woman's apartment and killing her, right? We got to react to seeing officers on tape kneeling on a man's neck for 9 minutes. That chapter asks us to push all of that out.
Yeah.
And sit with what we want this world to look like.
That's right.
And I mean, I think that's really key. And, the hope is that by the time folks finish reading How We Fight, that after they've read through all these ways that Black folks all over the place are fighting, which, sometimes it's like getting up, if we're going to be honest, getting out the bed.
Okay.
That they're able to identify their own mode of resistance, whether it's something that they're already doing and hadn't really realized that it was helping to inch us closer toward our collective liberation, or something new that they want to make a practice, as we were talking about earlier.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things I love about it so much. I think it helps folks see that, like, oh, like this thing I'm doing when I'm like giving myself a little self-care, a little joy, like I'm actually resisting white supremacy. Like that's real. The way I choose to parent, that can be an act of resistance, right? The way I'm in relationship with my loved ones, with community, like those are all acts of resistance and ways to fight white supremacy. And so I think that's one of the beauties of the book is that, I think it helps in some ways to reframe what it means to be an activist and makes it accessible, right, to more folks. Like there are many, many, many ways that you can be a part of dismantling a system that is working to keep us oppressed. We all have a role to play. And I think like the other thing I love about it that I think is similar, right, to anti-racism is like really weaving like the voices and the wisdom of many, many, many different people. And so this book also features, you've got at the beginning, just like photos and just like all the folks, right, who shared their stories or their wisdom and their other practices as a part of this book. And so I just, I really want to just like appreciate you for that, because I think that there is a communal spirit to the work that you're bringing into the world, where it's that like you are raising your voice, but you're also like bringing a whole bunch of folks along with you and really amplifying, what they're offering, what they're saying, how they're moving in the world. that helps to dismantle these systems. So I love that communal spirit of the way that you bring book offerings together.
Thank you. I'm glad that comes through.
And so, yeah, it definitely, for me, it definitely comes through. You know, there's a lot of different ways to write a book, right? But like I feel that weaving happening in your work, and it feels like it's an important part of your approach. And so we've mentioned a little bit, and you mentioned it earlier, kind of like different roles, right, for each of us in this work of fighting white supremacy, you know, based on our levels of privilege, like our different identities and where we have privilege and where we don't. And so one of the questions that I'm always sitting with, working with, you know, I am, as I said, in Atlanta, what is now known as Atlanta, which is, you know, unceded territory, actually, of Muskogee and Creek people. And I came here in the 90s at kind of like the height of hip hop, and particularly kind of like the emergence of like Southern hip hop, really becoming like a global phenomenon. And, you know, one of the reasons I've chosen to be here and to stay here for so long is because historically, you know, Atlanta is one of the Blackest cities, right, in this country. And that works for me. I like being in a Black city. So, you know, it's, you know, often called the South's Black Mecca, Atlanta. And so when we think about in this work of thinking about like anti-racism, particularly like in Black cities, Black spaces, Black organizations, where we have Black folks, right, Black bodies, but systemic racism and its impacts are still ever present, right? We know now, like just having Black bodies in the space doesn't change the impacts of systemic racism, right? And so I'm curious your thoughts about what is our role in anti-racism as Black folks, first of all, and then we can talk about other folks as well, but I'm particularly as Black folks, and particularly like in Black cities, in Black spaces, in Black organizations, like what is our role in the work of anti-racism?
Well, yeah, I mean, we touched on this a little bit earlier, you know, when I was talking about who you work for and school boards and all that kind of stuff. But I do always like to give the caveat that, right, we didn't create white supremacy. So ultimately, the work of dismantling the system falls on white folks, right? Like every single Black person, every single person of color could decide tomorrow that they are going to divest from this system. But if white folks decide that they want to keep, you know, hold on to their privilege and not use it to lift us up, and that the system works just fine for them, then we still in this, like, you know. So I think it's important to acknowledge the fact that while we have our role, that we are not the ones who are going to knock out the system all on our own. It's just not possible, because we're not and I'm not going to say we don't have ways to perpetuate it, but I am going to say that we are not the main ones.
Absolutely.
I think that, you know, I was talking earlier about how it really looks like being actively fighting against it and figuring out what your practice is. So like for me, that means what was read up top of my bio, right? Like centering the lived experience, working advocacy of Black folks and other folks of color. So that looks like writing books like these books. I have an editorial consultancy where I help racial and social justice nonprofits better serve the folks who they serve. I have my podcast, which really speaks to the fact that joy and pleasure, and not sirens, are important modes of resistance in a world that really seeks to relegate us to a joyless existence. Like I have molded over the years and am honestly always adding to what my practice looks like. And so what I think is important for us is to figure out what our individual practice is. What are the ways that you can fight every day? And again, I do recognize that on days like, you know, after the 2016 election, that looked like getting up, right? That looked like not being completely discouraged. Right now, you know, for some folks, that looks like making sure that you cast your vote. Although, I think voting is important. It's not the only thing, obviously. But we find our ways every day, and we create the habits that become a part of the way that we interact and move through the world. And just as it's important for them, it's important for us too. Another way that I sometimes talk about white supremacy is the fact that it's a smog. We all breathe it in. God willing, we keep breathing, right? So we sometimes inhale that. And so that can sometimes look like, upholding that system. It can look like going on the campaign trail for folks that don't have nothing to do with us in real life in any positive way, because we are aspiring to whiteness. We are aspiring to climb up that ladder because we think that somehow if we dance hard enough and tweet often enough, that somehow we'll be let into that whiteness, that they'll let us climb up that ladder. But the only thing that really happens is that you step it on the heads of the folks who are below you as you try to climb.
Yes.
So I think it's important for us to make sure that we don't get intoxicated by that toxic smog.
I love that. Intoxicated by the toxic smog. Okay, there's a lot of that going around.
So
what?
It's been a week and it's only Tuesday.
Right, exactly. Let's see how much more of that happens over the next 2 weeks. But what I'm hearing you say, though, is like the ultimate responsibility for ending white supremacy rests with the folks who created it, with white folks. And that for Black folks, like, our work is about, one, surviving that system, and two, understanding the ways in which we intentionally or unintentionally are perpetuating and holding that system up. Through our behaviors, our actions, our inactions, our practices, who we align ourselves with, who we center, right? So like us really taking a look at that's really what our role is. Am I hearing you right?
Yeah, no, you dead on.
Okay. And so then for other folks of color, right, and for white folks, like, what do you see as their role in anti-racism?
Okay, so it's a big sigh, sorry. Not personal. So I ask this question a lot, right? And I have five concrete things that you can do if you are white or another person of color and you don't know where to start.
That's great. Folks like this, they like those easy things.
Yes. So number one, don't ask Black folks to do emotional or any other labor for you.
Absolutely.
Stop texting and DMing and asking us what you should do, who you should donate, who, I don't know. I've just gotten what you should read. I get so many of those, and I'm not the only one. We're dealing with so much already. That's not it. Like, I say this all the time, Google is the homie. And if you ask him, he will tell you every time. You can just ask. You don't have to ask me. I'm not Google. So that's one.
Yeah.
Two, be courageous. Be courageous in holding yourself and the other white folks around you accountable for the ways that you are holding up the system of white supremacy. That's probably uncomfortable for you to think about, right? But I'm doing it. You can do it too. Third, gather your people. So that can look like on an interpersonal level, like pulling up your uncle when he says ignorant shit in the family group chat. But it can also look like working with white-led organizations like Showing Up for Racial Justice, Surge. There are so many organizations that have popped up, especially in the wake of, a lot of folks having their kind of awakening to what is happening this year, that you can work with that really center on the ways that white folks can undo this system. Fourth is one that I talked about earlier, which is providing financial support to organizations and people who are dedicated to the liberation of Black folks, in particular, those that support the work of saving Black trans lives. And number 5, stop teaching your kids to be colorblind.
Woo!
Lord D. When you say that you are colorblind and you teach your kids to be colorblind, what you're really saying is that you don't see us. How can you help to dismantle a system that you can't admit exists? Instead, you can use tools like anti-racism to teach your children to be anti-racist.
All right. You gave it to them. The quick five.
The quick five.
Right. Not easy, but free guidance, free game. Next time folks have to pay for that. And so this book, Anti-Racism, right? It is an entry point for a lot of people who may be just stepping, onto this path. And even for those, again, I think for those of us who have been on this path for a long time, again, I think it's like it provides, again, that inspiration, right? Like just to keep going. Like some of what I feel like I get from it is like the reminder, like, oh, I'm not alone. Like there's so many people and so many different kinds of people, right, who believe that this is the only, this is the way. Like this is the only way we're all going to be free, is to end white supremacy and racism. And so I'm curious, like, I know you are like doing the most this year promoting this book, and I know you have other work as well. So I'm curious, like, what impact is this book having on you?
Okay, first of all, I'm tired.
Yes.
So there's that. But beyond the exhaustion, I'm really glad that we get to lift up the voices that are here. Like, it was really important to me to not just highlight like the folks who we hear about every February.
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure that we lift up people who are doing this work right now.
Yes.
I think it's really important to situate this work in the present so folks can really understand that this fight is far from over. It's like how, folks always talk about on Twitter how they have these black and white photos of like the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. And they had color photographs, but it feels intentional, right? It's meant to make your mind think that this was so very long ago.
Right.
But it wasn't.
No.
It just wasn't. And so it was important to me to make sure that we're letting folks know that right now, there are people all around them who are doing the work.
That's right.
Every single day. And then besides, beyond making sure that there's a good mix of historical and contemporary quotes, it was really important to me to center Black folks in a conversation like we were talking about earlier. And so while there are other people of color there very intentionally, and there are also white folks there, Black folks really represent the bulk of the advocates who are quoted in the book. And that was intentional.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. You did that so well. And so you started to talk a little bit about the impact it's having on you, the impact you hope it's having on others. What else? What do you want folks to walk away with from having this book, in their library, having this book as something that they can, put on their coffee table or something they can turn to with the young people in their lives? What do you hope is the impact of this book? I mean, as you were just talking, it made me think like, particularly as I've been thinking about like, how is the history going to be written about 2020, right? I've been thinking a lot about that. What are they going to say about this time and about all of us, right? And I feel like this book will be one of those things, right, that we can look back at that represents, like you said, so many different voices, right, who are working towards the same goal. Like, Black folks, other folks of color, Latinx folks, Asian folks, Indigenous folks, white folks, like, who are all saying in their own way that, like, we want a different world, right? And again, some of these are folks' names that we know. A lot of them are folks' names we don't know, which is one of the things I really love about the book. And so, yeah, what do you hope the impact is, for folks who are going to like click on this green button below and buy this book? How do you hope they are impacted by this?
I think that, we talked earlier about how it kind of functions as a 101, but also as a reference. But ultimately, I hope that people either see themselves as they are now or the person who they want to be on the page. And that in seeing that and identifying in that way, that they'll be moved to do more than just reading. Because I think, we know that a lot of folks bought books earlier this year. It was all the rage right around May.
All kind of bestsellers this year.
But I want folks to move beyond just reading and figure out like what is the work that they have to do in order to develop their own anti-racist practice. Like that's ultimately what I hope that folks do. And it's one of the reasons that I love that this book is targeted, obviously it's for everyone, but for a YA audience, because we want young folks to come into this as early as possible, right?
Yes.
And so I think it provides an an entry into that. And I hope that it spurs folks to go and dig deeper and do more.
Absolutely. And I actually, you know, I feel, especially with young folks, like in so many ways, right? Like I feel like they are, you know, they are leading us, right? You know, they are pointing the way. They are like challenging us. They're pushing us. And I'm so grateful for that. And so, you know, lots of young folks, particularly we've seen, right, particularly this year with the uprisings, you know, folks protesting and demanding, you know, that Black life be honored and protected, right? I hope that this book, right, can be a balm, right? Can be a balm for them to say, like, again, you're not alone. There are a lot of people fighting this fight in lots of different ways. And we're working towards, you know, similar, right? Or hopefully the same.
They're part of this collective, part of this community. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay, well, I'm gonna like try to make a pivot here. So I would love, I know again, you are like, you know, because this is how Black women are, like multi-dimensional. You got all kinds of things going on that I want the people to know about. So tell us, I know you're doing the editorial work. You have your books that you are, you know, promoting. Tell us how else you spend your time. You mentioned your podcast. Tell us a little bit more about like, your interest in what you're up to these days.
Well, the main thing I do is be a mama all day, every day, because virtual learning. Although I'm sure my daughter feels like
parents, by the way, because I said shout out to all the parents who have been holding down in 2020 during a pandemic, with the full-time parenting and schooling and all the things. I have been holding y'all in my thoughts and prayers.
Thoughts and prayers.
I'm out of that stage, and so I can't even imagine.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I try not to complain because honestly, the fact that she is home and she is healthy is a blessing. And I honestly did not want her to go back to school. You know, my state or my county originally was planning on doing a hybrid kind of a situation, but you had the option to opt to stay home. And that's what we were going to do. So it was nice when they decided to go all virtual, because then I didn't have to explain to my daughter why her friends got to go to school and she was staying right here because I'm concerned.
Right.
You know, I know that the coronavirus disproportionately impacts Black folks, and I wasn't interested in sending her back when it didn't feel like, and still doesn't feel like things are under control enough for that to be a safe option. So I can't complain, but I am tired. So I do that, and I co-host and executive produce a podcast called The Turn On, which, as I mentioned earlier, is a Black literary erotica podcast, and it uses selections from books as a jumping off point for conversations about kind of, you know, having sex while Black. You know, we really look at the fact that, well, two things. One, sex doesn't exist in a silo, right? It touches all the other parts of our lives. And we, you know, one episode, we may be talking about sex and parenting. We may be talking about sex and work. We, you know, use that because obviously it's enticing and it's interesting and it brings us to the table, but then we're able to set the table with a lot of different things. But the other part of it, of why this show is important to me, because sometimes people ask me, like, how does this fit into your work? And it fits into my work because I believe that joy and pleasure are important parts of existence.
Talk about it.
You know, for so long, I've been forced to only bring pieces and parts of myself to the tables that I sit at, right? There's all these boxes that folks like to put us in regarding our sexuality. There's the boxes that you get put in if you use the way that your voice comes out of your mouth without having to code switch it. There's all these things. And so very often we leave pieces at home when we go out into the world, and I'm tired of that.
Right.
And so this is a part of who I am. I love that I get to bring myself. I love that I get to talk about the things that bring me and other folks pleasure and joy every week. That is a part of my liberatory practice.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's another of the things that I'm doing. And I'm writing another book.
Woo! Well, let me just say, like, I love that you have that podcast, and that's a liberatory practice for you. It is also for me. I mean, pleasure, and specifically Black women's pleasure. Like, I think that is such a key to fighting white supremacy, like just really centering ourselves and our pleasure. And so I love that you unapologetically, like that is a part of your portfolio, right? Your offering, right? Your practice. And so I encourage everyone to check out the podcast. I think it's on wherever you can find podcasts. It's available, the Turn On podcast. Tell me your best friend's name again.
Her name is Erica, and she is a sex educator, which is work that she found her way to through the podcast, which is pretty dope.
Beautiful, beautiful. So y'all check them out on the podcast. And yeah, so new book. You just don't stop, huh?
Listen, I'm supposed to be writing it right now. But I'm talking to y'all, which is it's called Complex Saviors. We'll see, book titles tend to move around. But it explores the ways that white supremacy threatens the lives of Black women.
Oh.
Yeah.
Listen.
So
order now.
I thought it was really important. I've done all this work around white supremacy and Black folks in general, but as we talked about earlier, being a Black woman is a big part of who I am. And I really wanted to recreate a work that centers on our issues. And I have a health background in terms of being a health editor, and I love reading studies and doing all these things. And so what this book does is it follows the life cycle of Black women from gestation through old age. And it highlights the ways that white supremacy threatens our lives. But more importantly, it highlights the community-centered ways that Black women are saving our own lives, which is why it really resonated with me earlier when you were talking about how you feel the community in my work. That's so important to me. And that's why it's called Complex Saviors, right? Because it really looks at the ways that we have to save ourselves, but I'm tired of saving myself.
Right.
Like, that's complex. That we are forced into situations where we're shown every day that our lives don't matter, and the only person that's going to come in with a cape is us.
Okay. Just us.
Yeah. And so that's the work that I am working on, and hopefully y'all will see it in spring of 2022. I am furiously writing.
Listen, I'm sending you all the good energy as you write. And I will be there to support when that is released. Hopefully we'll be outside again, so I'll be able to show up and support the launch of that book, Complex Saviors, how Black women are threatened by white supremacy and how we save our own lives. I love that. That is definitely the walk that I am on, and the walk that my like the women in my family and my ancestors have laid that path for me. So grateful for all of the work that you're doing. It's so meaningful. It's so not that any of this is new, right, in terms of our lived experiences as Black folks and Black women, but it's just such a gift, right, to see ourselves reflected, right, in books, in writings, in media. So thank you for your love and your commitment to us in everything that you do. For me, at least, it shines through, which is why I continue to be drawn to supporting you and supporting your work.
Thank you. I mean, I appreciate that. And I feel the same way about your work. And y'all, I don't think y'all understand that when she says she's supportive, she really, really, we met at an event in Atlanta, because I never skip Atlanta on a book tour. This is Anti-Racist is my 5th book. And Atlanta is, I love getting to see Black folks. I just do. And we met, the last time I was there, and you reached out and were like, yo, you got a new book? Bet.
Right.
What can we do? And I just appreciate that this is not just talk, like you walk this walk. And I appreciate that about you.
Thank you so much. I received that with so much gratitude, So I, could go on forever asking you questions, but I wonder if anyone else has questions for Kenrya before we get ready to close. There is one question that I can see here so far. And I'll just kind of paraphrase. And it really is about, we both talked about, being parents. And so this question is related to racism within schools, especially in communities that are with mostly Black and brown students. As a parent, like, I don't know if you have a personal experience or what's your sense of, like, how do you voice your concerns about those issues, like, as racism is taking place inside of our schools and impacting our young people? What's that look like for you?
Well, I did indeed have a personal experience, and now my daughter's in a different school.
Oh.
Yeah, so she started off in Montessori schools because where I live, pre-K, you got to pay. They don't have funded programs. And so we started at one that was wonderful. We moved to another, and then we had an incident. My daughter usually, like right now, she's got twisted beads. And every now and then I let her wear her hair out. And it's every now and then because she got a lot of hair. And it's a lot for me to have to wrestle with. And so we can't do it all the time. But on this particular day, I'd taken her twist out and was like, yo, you got a beautiful twist out. You can wear this to school this week. And she started to cry. And I was like, baby, what's wrong? And she's like, well, the last time I wore my hair like this, they laughed at me and they touched my hair. So I had a conversation with her, we talked about it, we sorted through her feelings, we processed, and she hadn't told me when it happened because she knew that I was going to be upset. And we had to have another conversation about how you don't protect adults' feelings, that is not your job, that it is my job to protect yours. But anyway, and so then I set up some meetings. I talked to her teacher, I talked to the principal, I talked to the person who was over the education program. And what I was met with pretty much at every turn was an attempt to minimize my daughter's experience. Her teacher said, they're just curious. I said, okay. So here's the thing, right? If these kids are curious, you are the teacher. It is your job to educate them. It is not my daughter's job to educate them. 1, 2, consent is a very real thing, and it doesn't only matter when we're talking about someone touching someone in an inappropriate place. Anywhere that you touch my daughter is inappropriate if she has not taught you that, told you that it was okay.
That's right.
And even in me framing it that way, like I was telling her, like when we go to the doctor's office, we always ask if someone can touch her before they do. I'm trying to instill the idea of consent in all areas of her life, that she has autonomy over herself and over her body.
That's right.
And try to explain to her that even if you set aside the fact that this is a problem in this class of primarily white kids, of these kids touching my child and making her feel bad about her hair, the way that it grows out of her head, to the point where she's crying and not wanting to go to school, that is a problem, but also that you're undermining what I'm teaching her about her autonomy, and that's also a problem. And, folks, the teacher just didn't get it. The folks in the administration office seemed to get it, but it was mostly just a lot of, making all the right noises kind of a deal.
Yeah.
But I knew in that moment that she could no longer go to that school. She didn't feel supported. I didn't feel supported. When you're sending your child somewhere for several hours a day, you hope that you can have a partnership and that your child is not othered, even once, let alone on a daily basis. And so it then became, and to say that, I think some people may be like, oh, you pulled your kid out right away. Well, we had already gone through, when they found out what work I did, the free labor thing. Well, we wanted to start a parent group. We want to remake our mission and all of this. So because I know that we have to advocate for our kids, I said, sure. I helped bring in anti-racist training into the school, but it was mandatory for all the staff. A small fraction of the parents ended up coming. Like, I tried to do the work and to help, push them along this path of being a better place for my child and for other kids who look like her. But this incident happened like 3 weeks after that.
Wow.
So the end of that for me. I think that it's important for us to advocate for our kids, but I'm also not going to argue with you about my child's humanity.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
That was it. So now she's in a lovely public school that we used to be able to walk to, where she is not one of very few in a room, and she feels supported, and we feel like we're part of the community, and it made all the difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful that you know, not only because of the work you do, but just who you are, right? That you were able to step in and to advocate, for her well-being and for her humanity. That's really what it's about. It's like, this is a human being that is deserving of being treated with dignity and respect. And it's just, I talk about like sovereign human being. Like, I am a sovereign human being. You don't get to, make decisions or to touch or to do any of those things without permission. Without permission. That's also something I've tried to the best of my ability, instill in my daughter as well. So thank you for sharing that story. Let's see what else is here as we prepare to close. Okay, this is Kayla. Hey, Kayla. Kayla's asking, could you reshare the definition and the explanation that you shared about white supremacy and kind of a ladder, the hierarchy of value of different folks?
Sure. So the definition that I use is that white supremacy is a political, I hope y'all can hear that, political, social, and economic system. Okay, we're just gonna let it go. Okay, I live down the street from a fire station, so
life, we understand.
I define white supremacy as a political, social, and economic system that thrives on the subjugation of folks who've not been let into whiteness. That let into whiteness part is kind of key, right? Because the definition of who is white has changed a lot over the years. And the way that I then help people to visualize it is I say, you should imagine a ladder, and that ladder is white supremacy, and it's rooted into the earth. And on the very top rung of that ladder sits a white, middle-aged, wealthy, cisgender, heterosexual, Christian, able-bodied man. And then all the rest of us get slotted onto the rungs below him based on the oppressors that we are dealing with each and every day that push us closer down toward the earth. And that those oppressors are things like racism and homophobia and ableism and classism and xenophobia, all the things that we've seen in full force this year and every year, because the reality is none of this is new for us.
That's right.
I think a lot of folks are, their eyes are being opened to things that we've been living with each and every day in this country. That there is nothing new under the sun when it comes to the ways that the system of white supremacy weighs us down.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's see what else is there. Oh, there's just this isn't a question. Looks like it's just a shout out from your cousin, Tanisha.
Hey, Tony.
He was very proud of you and loves you very much. So I love that cousin love. I love
That's one of my first cousins that I was talking about.
One of the 140 something, right?
Yeah. There's so many of us.
Right. Well, I'm so glad that they were with us tonight. I'm not seeing any more questions. So if you have a last minute question, like, now's your opportunity to slide that in because we're going to get ready to close. And again, I just want to uplift the two books. The green button at the bottom of your screen will take you right to a page where you can purchase Anti-Racism, Powerful Voices, Inspiring Ideas. And I think in the chat box, Karis also put a link for How We Fight White Supremacy. So I would highly recommend both of these books. I consider them like part of my self-care, right? They're the kinds of books that you can go back to over and over and over again, particularly if you're someone who is, making a commitment or deepening a commitment to be on this journey, right, for the rest of your life. So these are resources to support you in that. So please pick those up virtually. Pick those up. And Kenrya, how can folks find you, follow you, support you? What's the best way to keep in touch with you?
So one of the benefits of my parents being very creative is that I get to use my name on everything. So
I relate to that.
Yes, exactly. So I am at Kenrya, which is Kenrya on all the socials. My website is kenrya.com, and you can buy not these books because you need to buy these books here, but any of the other books there. And the Turn On podcast is at the turnonpodcast.com, and anywhere that you want to listen to a podcast is there. So I just hope that y'all, support. Appreciate you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I'm so grateful to you for for saying yes to this conversation. Like you said, I literally just reached out like, hey, I got your book. I love it. Like, can we talk about it in front of a bunch of people? And you were like, sure. So I'm so grateful that, again, like I said, I feel this value from you around like just community, right? And just being in relationship and connection. And so I appreciate you like enthusiastically saying yes, showing up tonight, sharing so generously from, your experience, both personally and in the work that you do. Just like deep gratitude. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation.
Thank you for asking. Yeah. I appreciate you.
Yes, yes, yes. And I'll be in touch. Thank you.
So thank you both. This was amazing. Thank you to our wonderful audience for your comments. And thank you especially to our librarian friends who just dropped so much knowledge in this chat. So I saw that they are going to send out some resources, but be sure, I think it's also helpful if you email directly and indicate that you were interested in the resources. That saves them a little bit of labor. You also can at any point just scroll back through. The chat will stay up. So you can just go back through and click. You don't have to panic. It's not like Zoom. It doesn't go away. This will immediately be available for rebroadcast as soon as we close out the window. So if you have a friend who would want to watch this, send them the URL. They can watch it right away. Karis will repackage this and put it on YouTube with captions. So if you know anyone who's deaf or hard of hearing that would like to be able to read this, that'll be up in a couple days, and I'll send an email to everyone who registered letting you know about that. The last thing it's my pleasure and honor to do is to let you know that Karis is a nonprofit, and so all of our work is individually donor funded. So $1, $5, $10, that is how we pay for this work. It's also how we pay for our support groups and things like that. And one of the support groups I want to let the white folks who are watching know about is we have a group called the Race Conscious Parenting Collective. It meets every the last Wednesday of every month, and it's really designed for parents to be, grandparents, teachers, clergy, anybody who's trying to dismantle white supremacy from within the family unit to come and do that troubleshooting in a group where you're not asking Black folks to do that emotional labor with you. So I co-facilitate that with 2 other people. It's a really wonderful group. It's been going for 6 years, and it's a really stable container to do this work. So if you're new to this, if this night has kicked off some seeds of ideas for you, it's free. Come join us. You are welcome. We would love to have you. I also want to let folks know that this Sunday we have Alicia Garza and Patrice Cullors coming to talk. So they are co-mothers of the Black Lives Matter movement. I'm going to drop that link in the chat in just a second, but they will be with us Sunday at 4:30 p.m. Eastern time. So totally free. Please spread the word because it's going to be an amazing conversation. It's centered around Alicia Garza's new book, The Purpose of Power. So lots to see and do as we prepare for the next little bit of time where things are going to be wild. So let's gather our resources and one another. This evening was certainly a wonderful gathering. So thank you both so much.
Yeah, thank you, ER.
Have a great night.
You
Stay
too.
safe.
Bye-bye.